There we go. Hello and welcome to another Green Thumb lecture series. My name is John Schaefer and I'm with the Harris County Public Library. And joining me today will be a member of the Harris County Master Gardeners Association for a very special presentation and discussion. Of course, we are here online every third Tuesday of the month at 11 a.m. So you are here at the right time. Today's topic is identifying good and bad bugs. Very interesting. Before I introduce our presenter, I just want to go over a couple of things really quick. First of all, we love questions. So as you are watching the presentation, please feel free to type those questions into the comment section of Facebook or wherever you're watching this. And we will be getting to those. We'll stop along the way, and we will also stop in the midway point. And at the end, obviously, we want to get to all of your questions. And second of all, I want to let everybody know that June 18th will be our next show, and that will be seed saving and starting. So seed saving and starting on June 18th. Mark your calendars right now. And now, of course, today we were talking about identifying good and bad bugs. So I'm very excited to introduce our presenter. Here we go. I'll get her in here. Miss Deborah Caldwell. She was a professor of biology and environmental science and agroecology in California for over 30 years. She is now a Harris County Master Gardener and has an advanced certificate in entomology, so she knows what she's talking about. She is, of course, a lifelong gardener with many years of experience and growing ornamentals and vegetables. And we are so lucky to have her here. We are very excited. Deborah, how are you doing today?
I'm just fine, John. Thank you for the introduction. It's good to see you again.
It's good to see you as well. Good to see you as well. Now, I am very interested in this because I just had a bug problem in one of my trees, a little web thing with some worms, and hopefully you'll get through those. And I disposed of them. Hopefully they were not good bugs, but I guess we will find that out as we go. So without further ado, let's get your presentation started, and we'll be stopped. I'll interrupt you along the way if that's okay for questions.
Absolutely. Yes, as John said, we welcome your questions. So we will be talking about identifying and managing good and bad bugs today. I do want to mention some of our other talks that are going to be coming up soon this year in our Green Thumb Gardening Series. As John mentioned, we'll have someone talking about seed saving and starting in June. And then in July, we have a talk on fall's best vegetable gardening. And I'll be back in August to talk about growing bulbs in Texas. So we hope that you continue to join us for our Green Thumb lectures. So let's get into our topic today by defining what we mean by a bug. Some people use that term very loosely to describe just about any sort of invertebrate or animal that doesn't have a backbone. That would include things like snails and slugs and worms. Some people reserve the term bug for arthropods, which are animals that have jointed legs and an exoskeleton. We're going to narrow it down a little bit today and focus just on the insects. As we mentioned, insects have an exoskeleton. They have 6 jointed legs, antennae, and most adults have 4 wings. You might be surprised to learn that most animals, in fact, 80% of all animals are insects. It's estimated that there are about 1 million different species on Earth, at least. I'm sure there are many more that haven't been found and named yet. And if we did do a count right now at this very moment, we would find that there are about 10 quintillion individual insects crawling around at this very moment. It is kind of worrisome, though, that we are seeing declines in some types of insect species. Some are actually increasing, but they're kind of like canaries in the coal mine. And if we do continue to see a decline in insect species, it might be a sign of some environmental problems that we need to deal with. Now, even though we have our title, Good and Bad Bugs, I don't really believe that bugs are good or bad because every organism has an essential role to play in its ecosystem. Sometimes, though, an insect will bother us in some way or even harm us. Usually they're just going about their business. Mosquitoes, for example, are a huge problem right now after all the rain. They are simply biting us, not because they're vicious or hate us, but because the female mosquitoes needs a blood meal or protein from us in order to lay her eggs. So she's just trying to reproduce when she bites you. In some cases, insects are considered to be bad if they are coming from some other part of the world. Uh, they come into Harris County and they don't have their normal predators or parasites or diseases or other checks on their population, and they can grow out of control and cause problems. But keep in mind, every insect has a role to play. The fact is, most insects are classified as good or beneficial, or they're just neutral. They don't affect us in any way. It's only about 5% that get the designation bad bug or pest insect. Now, in the category that we consider to be good or beneficial, many insects provide food for a lot of other organisms. Those mosquitoes, for example, are food for birds and bats and many other organisms. Some insects act as decomposers. Some are predators or parasitoids. And of course, we always think of the pollinators when we think of beneficial insects. So let's start with the decomposers. Some of us think they're kind of icky because we often find them in waste or decomposing material. But they have an important job to do because they help to begin the process of breaking down organic matter. They chew up the big chunks and increase the surface area so other decomposers like fungi and bacteria can take over and break down the organic matter into smaller and smaller pieces. And in doing that, they're going to release nutrients into the soil, which help our plants grow. So among some of the decomposers you might encounter, you may see cockroaches, flies, or grubs, which are essentially baby beetles. Beetle larvae are referred to as grubs. Some insects are predators and they will kill and eat other animals. You can see the ladybug or lady beetle. Now, that may not look like what you think of when you think of a lady beetle. That's actually the larva of a lady beetle. I've known people who've killed these thinking they were bad bugs. But in fact, just like the adults, these larvae cruise around on your plants and gobble up all the pests. So you definitely want to protect them. In the middle photo, you can see my hand next to a very, very large wasp. Again, people often freak out and reach for the pesticide to try to kill all the wasps. This one, though, is a cicada killer. It doesn't want to bother you. It's just in search of nice, juicy cicadas to eat. And on the green background, you can see an assassin bug. This rather formidable insect is a North American wheel bug, sometimes referred to as assassin bug. And they're good size. They're about 2 inches long, and you may see them crawling around in your yard. And again, think they're a bad bug, but in fact, they're searching for pests and other insects to eat. This is one you might want to admire from afar, though, because they have a very, very painful bite. And I've heard that the pain lasts for about 2 weeks. So look, but don't touch the assassin bug. Parasitoids are insects whose larvae live on or in a host and eventually kill them. So in the photograph, you can see an adult braconid wasp who will lay her eggs on a caterpillar. In this case, it's a tomato hornworm covered in eggs. As the larvae hatch out of the eggs, they will eat the caterpillar from the inside out. So if you do find this type of infested caterpillar, maybe move it off your tomato, but let it live. It's not going to last long. And during the time it survives, it will provide food for more braconid wasps so they can continue that cycle. And as I mentioned, we often think of the pollinators as the beneficials. because they're busy carrying pollen grain from the male part of one flower to the female part of another. There are many types of pollinators, including things like birds and bats, but many insects fill that role as well, including bees and butterflies. But in addition, other kinds of insects often are pollinators as well. So you might find beetles pollinating your plants, flies, wasps. There are many other types of insects that are also pollinators. So let's go ahead and turn to the bad boys. First, let's talk about how we can attract pollinators to our gardens. You basically need to give them what they need in terms of food, shelter, and water. But keep in mind that you want to provide food for different stages of their life cycle, both for the larvae as well as adults. So for pollinators, for example, you want to have a wide variety of different kinds of plants, different sizes, different shapes, different flower colors, different fragrances. The larvae sometimes need specialized types of food. So we all know about monarchs who eat the milkweeds, or the pipevine swallowtail, which, as its name tells us, eats pipevines. But also, you want to have a wide variety of plants for the adults. You also want to make sure there's water available and shelter. So the best way to do this is to make sure that you have a lot of diversity in your garden.
Real quick, if I can interrupt you, Deborah. So
Mhm.
just want to confirm, a wasp is a pollinator, and that even the kind that, like yellow jackets and wasp, and we would want to attract those. I mean, are
Oh,
not
no. No, there's many, many different kinds of wasps.
right.
Some are real pests like yellow jackets, although
Okay, okay.
they harm us because they're trying to defend their nest usually. Uh, some are parasitoids, some
Okay.
are pollinators. It really depends on the type of wasp.
Awesome. I wasn't sure I got that right. And we had a great question from Alicia came in on Facebook, and you might be covering this later. She asked about, wanted you to discuss discern worms. I believe she said if there's I might have gotten their name wrong, but worms as well. So we had more people are getting want to hear all about the worms when you get to them.
Well, worms are not insects. So some
So
of
there
what
you
we talk about when we talk about IPM will apply to the worms, but they're really not part of our discussion today.
Good to know. All right. Thanks.
Okay, now let's turn to the bad boys. These are what we consider to be pests. Essentially, they're any unwanted insect that interferes with human activity. They don't actually have to harm us. They might just be annoying. So I put those into 4 categories, and there are probably more, but just for convenience sake, today we're going to talk about the sapsuckers, chewing insects, wood-destroying insects, and some of the household pests. The sapsuckers are often a big problem for our plants. These include insects such as aphids and mealybugs, scales, whiteflies. They have piercing or sucking mouth parts. They're almost like a hypodermic needle. And they are very common as plants are producing a lot of new growth. They love the tender leaves, and they will suck out fluid from the plant. They can stunt the shoots. You may see just hordes of them, as you can see in both of these photographs. And they often produce what we call honeydew. This is just the waste that they produce, but it's full of sugar, and it provides a food source for a type of fungus called sooty mold or black sooty mold. In the bottom photo, you can see some crepe myrtles that were infested with crepe myrtle bark scale. And notice how black the branches are. That's because they're covered with this black sooty mold. Sometimes you will see ants on the plants as well, and the ants are actually farming these sap-sucking insects. They help to take care of them and even defend them so that they can eat the honeydew as well. Chewing insects also are a big problem for our plants, and there are many different types, including leaf beetles, various kinds of larvae, including caterpillars and grubs, leafcutter ants, grasshoppers, the list goes on and on. So you may see holes in your plants and immediately suspect some of these chewing insects. But right now we're getting a lot of questions after the rains because snails and slugs and also roly-polies, which are not insects, are chewing on our leaves as well. So it's always a good idea to make sure you know what's actually attacking your plant. You may need to do a little detective work and get out there and poke around and look under the leaves, look down in the soil, or even go out at night and see if the culprits might be something like snails or slugs. Another major type of pest that we encounter are the various wood-destroying termites and beetles. Here in Harris County, we have our own native subterranean termites that will chew on the wood in our houses and cause a lot of damage. They're frightening enough, but recently we've also had some invaders, the Formosan subterranean termites. These breed very quickly. They seem to be able to get rather huge numbers, maybe 1 million in a colony, and they are quite aggressive. They can cause a lot of damage very quickly, and we've also noticed that sometimes they even attack live trees. So these are some to look out for. In addition, you may find various sorts of beetle larvae attacking trees. There's quite a variety of wood borers, the longhorn beetles, engraver beetles. They seem to be most attracted to trees that are stressed, damaged, or dying. We had a real problem after the very hot, dry summer that we had. Many of the bark beetles attacked pine trees, and when a tree is infested with these, there's really nothing you can do about them. The tree is basically going to die. So we usually recommend that you cut down the tree and dispose of all the wood as soon as possible before these beetles spread to other trees. So some of the wood destroying insects can be quite destructive. We also have several household pests. They tend to be attracted to our houses just like we are because it's a place to live. It gives them what we call harborage or shelter. They may also be attracted to food or water. And the best way to deal with these kinds of pests is prevention. Keep them out if you can. So, for example, window screens, keeping your doors closed, quite important to just keep them out. Blocking any kinds of cracks that you may have, any entryways for these kinds of pests. And then also you can eliminate food as much as possible by cleaning up any kinds of crumbs or food spills and maybe putting away pet food, for example. You can try to keep them from being attracted to water as well because leaks, wet spots in our houses can also attract these kinds of household pests. So there's actually a large number of insects that live with us that you probably don't even know about. They did a study in North Carolina where they looked at several houses and they found that on average 93 kinds of bugs live with the average person. Now, some of them are pests, ants and roaches and flies and so on. But for the most part, you probably don't even know that they're there. They're the type of neutral insect that coexists with us and they don't bother us at all. So let me stop here and see if we have any questions.
We do. And by the way, I just want to say that the idea of having 93 insects in my where I live, you've ruined my weekend.
You won't sleep again.
I am sorry. I'm going to go get a can of Raid right now. No, Uh, First off, it was a typo. I looks like we'd had it was sod web worms was what
Ah,
Alicia was asking about, which
okay.
I guess are still possibly worms. Okay, uh, so I had one question come in, and I thought this was kind of interesting. What about like facilitating? You're talking about you're talking about insects as food. Like, what if everybody loves lizards and geckos? What can you bring in more? I know they eat insects or bats or anything. Any recommendations for things that can maybe keep down the population of some of the more unwanted bugs?
Well,
Or
again, having a very diverse garden with a lot of different kinds of plants will provide shelter for the kinds of predators that will help control insects. Um, we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we talk about managing insects, but diversity will help bring in a much wider variety of other animals that can help control them.
Diversity the answer. All right, I'll let you go with that. And I just wanted to echo your pine bark beetle problem. That was my mother lost a pine tree in her
Yeah.
backyard. That was, I mean, about as big. I couldn't get my arm around it, and it was there ever since I was a kid. And it was a tragedy to see it go. But yeah, we went out there, and it was they'd gotten to it, and it was gone. So it was a sad thing. So check your trees on that. All right, well, let's keep going. I'm sure we'll have more questions as they come in. Please, if you have questions, keep typing those in, and we will get to those as we go. And I'll let you get back to it, Deborah.
Okay, I do see Alicia's specifying sod webworms, which are the larvae of a type of moth. So as I said, as we go through and start talking about managing, we may be able to help her with that question. So that is the question.
All right,
How can
hang
we
in there,
manage?
Alicia.
And generally, what we recommend is using IPM. If you've never heard of that before, it stands for Integrated Pest Management. IPM has been around for, oh gosh, about 80 years, if not more. And it was used as far back as 1972 in Texas by some of the Texas AgriLife Extension agents who worked with cotton growers to try to help manage pests. So let's learn a little bit more about what IPM is. The basic principles of IPM are to use a whole variety of different methods to try to control pests. Pesticides may be part of an IPM program, but what we try to do is use the least hazardous chemical pesticides. And the idea is that we recognize the fact that we're never going to eliminate any pest, but we try to keep them down to a dull roar where we can still get fruits and vegetables and flowers and enjoy our gardens. So the idea is to try to minimize risks for the entire ecosystem, all the animals and plants, as well as our pets, our children, ourselves. And to be effective, of course, any pest program has to be both practical and economical. So that's also part of IPM. So there's several steps that we go through if we're trying to use an IPM program to manage pests. And the first step is to try to build our knowledge base. So that involves perhaps doing a little bit of research, learning a little bit more about gardening, but also just going out in your yard and making observations. What does a normal plant look like? What do the flowers or vegetables normally look like? And if there is a pest, we need to identify it. So in the photograph, you can see a kind of ugly looking tomato, and you might wonder what sort of pest has caused this. It might be a disease or fungus of some sort, or perhaps there's an insect pest that has caused damage. Well, with a little research, you'll find that this tomato has cat facing, and that's actually caused by cold temperatures when the flowers are forming. So in this case, there's no pest at all. You probably just planted tomatoes a little early. Now, speaking about identifying insects, how do you know what you have there? There's several good resources. A book that I recommend is the Field Guide to Common Texas Insects. and it's packed with colorful photos and a lot of information about insects that you may encounter. It will help you identify what may be bugging you. On my phone, I use an app called Seek, which is through iNaturalist. There are many other sorts of apps that you can have on your phone, but I found that Seek is quite good. It involves just taking a photograph of the insect, a nice close-up, or I can use it for any plants or other animals as well. But it's pretty good at identifying accurately. I can usually get down to the genus, and sometimes it tells me exactly what I'm looking at. On my computer, I often use Bug Guide. It's a website that has a clickable guide with drawings of some of the common insects. So you can find something that looks like the one that you have that's causing problems. Click on that drawing and it will help you identify and give you a lot more information about the insects. So it's very important to go through this step to actually find what might be chewing holes in your plant or what you're seeing in your lawn or at the tips of your growing plants. Then you'll be better prepared to deal with it and manage it effectively. Next step, after you've done your identification, is to scout or monitor and assess the pest numbers and see what kind of damage they're doing. So you may find that there's only one plant that actually has the pest, and possibly you could remove that plant and dispose of it. Is it just a certain kind of plant? Is it a certain part of the plant that's affected? For example, you'll often see that the sapsuckers are on the new green growth or flower buds. That's the most tender, tasty part of the plant. Do you notice patterns in your landscape? Maybe you will find that you're noticing the pest only in shady areas or maybe areas where there's poor air circulation. So by pruning and opening up the plants, you might be able to deal with the pest that way. Maybe it's just in the hot, dry areas. So maybe those plants are stressed and need a little bit more water. So by scouting and monitoring and getting a sense of the pest numbers, you'll be able to move on to the next step, which is determining when you have too much of the pest. How many pests are too many? And this, to some extent, is kind of a personal determination. If you're growing food for your family, you know, a few pests might be too many if they're making it impossible for you to get a crop. Is it aesthetic? Maybe you just don't like seeing the pest on your plants. With aphids, for example, I always get a little hot and bothered when I see the aphids on the tips of my hibiscus, but overall, they're really not bothering me, and I know they're not going to affect the plant. They still bloom and they still thrive. Is there some sort of health issue with the pest? So it's up to you. You can determine how many pests are too many for you to tolerate. So let's say you found too many pests, it's time to do something. The great thing about IPM is it uses a whole toolbox full of management tools, biological and cultural tools, physical or mechanical tools, and sometimes chemical tools can be used as well. So you have this whole panoply of different kinds of methods that you can try. So cultural control is usually the beginning of the methods that we try, and we always want to try to prevent the pest in the first place by choosing the right plant for the right place. A happy plant is going to be much stronger and much less likely to have pests. We can try to choose plants that are resistant to certain types of pests. If we know there's a problem in our area, we could try to choose resistant plants. Also, if you're buying plants from a nursery, you want to inspect them carefully to make sure you're not bringing any pests back home. If you do find pests, you want to dispose of the refuse. You don't want to compost it or leave it in your yard. Get rid of it, bag it, and send it out with the trash. Also, part of cultural control is making sure that you have great soil and the soil is well drained. They're getting the right amount of water, and you want to avoid giving a plant too much fertilizer because fertilizer again promotes that fresh green growth that the pests love. Other things that you can do would include rotating crops so that, let's say you've grown tomatoes in one part of your garden this year, you'd want to make sure that you grow something completely different in that plot next year. Also avoid the tomato family in general. So you wouldn't want to put peppers and eggplant there either. We already mentioned diversity in your garden. By growing many different kinds of plants, you are less likely to have a huge population of a pest. You might get some infestation on the plants that they tend to eat, but you're not creating a monoculture or just one type of species that will draw in a huge number of pests. You might be able to adjust planting times. The squash vine borer, for example, sometimes can be thwarted if you plant your squash later in the summer. Um, you can mulch, you can cut out weeds, which sometimes provide harborage for pests. Overall, as we mentioned earlier, you want to provide habitat for predators who can come in and take care of the pests. So all of these are examples of good cultural control. Now, let's say we've tried this, our plant still has some pests. What's next? Well, we can move on to physical types of control or mechanical control with something like aphids, for example. You can zap them with a spray of water, and basically you just knock them off the plant. And since they're tiny, it takes them a long time to crawl back up the plant. With something like snails and slugs or something like tomato hornworms, you can do the pick and squish method. I used to carefully take all of the snails out of my yard and I put them in a can, and then I would take them over to an empty field and release them. And then they built a housing development. So I wasn't able to use that method anymore. So I know it seems
Wait a second. Did the snails build the housing settlement, or
no,
was
but I'm sure the folks who moved in wondered why they had such a snail problem.
Yeah, got it. Real quick, back up. We had a question, if we
Yeah.
could. You're talking about planting, using plants that are resistant to
Mhm.
bugs. Now, do you mean specifically like that are just naturally resistant, or some that have been genetically modified? Would you recommend those to,
Mostly, well, it could be either, but a good example with the squash vine borer is there are some types of squash that seem to be less likely to get infested with the squash vine borer. I can't think of the name, begins with a T, but I actually wrote an article on the squash vine borer in our Urban Dirt newsletter. So you can go into Harris County Master Gardener's website and look through the newsletters. So
that sounds like a good chance to put that plug up there in that website. So I will do that and let you get back to it, Deborah. Thanks. We'll talk more later.
okay. Many of our methods, physical or mechanical methods, are exclusion. So something like row covers, like you see in the photograph at the bottom, or nets, or some kind of barrier can prevent the insect from reaching your plant. So for example, with our fall crops, we often grow the brassicas like cabbage, broccoli, some of the kale and other greens, and they tend to get those little tiny green worms that really could decimate them. Those little worms are caterpillars, actually, and they are going to hatch from eggs that have been deposited by the female butterflies. So if we can keep the females from laying eggs on our plant with the row cover, then we can prevent them from eating our brassicas. Traps can be effective against some kinds of insect pests. We can also sometimes mow to get rid of plants that might be harboring them, or tillage. Tilling the soil can also help with some. Again, squash vine borer is a good example because the larvae are actually down in the soil in our gardens. And so if we rototill, we can cut them in two and kill some of them at least. In addition, of course, we can use biological control, and we've already talked about the PPP, the predators and parasitoids. We can add pathogens or germs, one-celled organisms that can kill certain kinds of insect pests. A good example is BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, is a type of bacteria that you can buy as a powder and mix up with water and spray on your plants, and it will cause the caterpillars and other larvae to develop a pretty severe tummy ache when they ingest the BT and then eventually die. So that's an effective use of biological control. We've already talked about the predators like lady beetles or parasitoids like the wasps that lay their eggs on caterpillars. All of those are types of biological control. A different kind of biological control, as we mentioned, is genetic resistance, where plants have been bred to have some resistance to certain kinds of pests. All right, now we could move on to various types of chemical control. There are a number of what are called botanicals. They're derived from plants. Pyrethrum, for example, comes from chrysanthemums. Neem oil comes from the neem tree. The other kinds of oils can come from things like pine, citrus, cloves. Other types of herbs are often used as a sort of chemical control. And there are also insecticidal soaps that can kill insects. You have to understand, though, that these types of chemical control can be harmful to beneficial insects as well. Now, there are things you can do to minimize harm to pollinators, for example. Let's say you're spraying an insecticidal soap to get rid of a pest, and you want to minimize damage to pollinators like honeybees. You could apply very early in the morning or maybe later in the evening when the honeybees are not active. But those kinds of chemical controls can be harmful to beneficials as well. There also can be use of synthetic pesticides in IPM, but when we're looking for a synthetic pesticide, we want to keep in mind several things, including selectivity. Sometimes you'll see an insecticide that is labeled broad spectrum, and that means it's going to kill a whole host of different kinds of pests. So that's not what we want. We want a pesticide that is very narrow spectrum or very selective and really targeted specifically for that kind of pest. Another thing to keep in mind is persistence, and that refers to the time that the pesticide will remain harmful and in the environment. Some pesticides can continue to be harmful for years. They may spread through the food chain and affect many other organisms, even including people. So you want a pesticide that does the job and does not persist for long at all. You also want to make sure that you read the label very, very carefully, follow directions precisely as to time, rate, and place where you spray or use the pesticide. This is a situation where more is not better, because you could create a very hazardous situation. I chose this photograph of a gardener using a pesticide because he is using personal protective equipment, and that's very important. You want to protect yourself if you're using a pesticide by covering your body, maybe wearing a mask and goggles. Definitely want to wear gloves, closed-toed shoes, and so on, so that you're not getting the pesticide on your skin. So when we put all of these IPM methods together, you can see we have this so-called pyramid of IPM methods, starting first with prevention and then moving up to um, physical or mechanical methods. Those don't work. We might move on to biological methods. If we're still having a problem, we might resort to soaps or botanicals like neem oil. And then finally, as a last resort, if nothing else has worked, we might reach for a synthetic pesticide. And you can see what's happening as we move up the IPM pyramid is an increase in toxicity. So to get back to Alicia's question about those sod webworms, prevention is the first step. Having a very healthy lawn, it's being mowed at the right height, it is not over fertilized, you're getting it the right amount of water, the right amount of sun, and so on. That would be the first step in dealing with something like sod webworms. So with mosquitoes, again, it's the same idea. Prevention is the very first step in preventing the mosquito problem. Let's actually move on and look at the final steps. You want to keep records of what you've done and then review your work as well so that you can determine whether or not you achieved the results that you wanted, and was the method satisfactory? Were there any unintended side effects or consequences? And by keeping records, you can plan ahead and often prevent the pest from starting in the first place. So for example, you might record the time of year when you first saw a pest, and that way you would be forewarned and prepared the next year. So those are some examples of the different steps of IPM. Let's look at how we might use it for sap-sucking insects like aphids. So step one, remember, you want to make some observations and determine what's normal. Sap-sucking insects often increase in the springtime, so we could be expecting them. Then we would want to move on to monitoring and assessing. We want to make sure we know which sap-sucking insects are causing problems. And then we could also check on the numbers, type of plant, part of the plant, any patterns in our landscape that we're noticing. Then we would move on to determining our threshold levels. When are aphids, too many aphids? And then we would choose what kind of method we would use to intervene. So we might need to prune out some infected parts of the plant. With aphids, though, we'd probably be removing the newest growth, so we might not want to do that. We could check and see if there's good air circulation. Is the plant overwatered? Those are some kinds of cultural steps that we could take. Excuse me. Then if nothing has worked, we might move on to zapping them with that stream of water. Depending on the type of plant, we might use some sort of barrier or protective cover. Often with aphids, it's a good idea to just be patient, because those aphids are going to attract predators like lady beetles and lacewings that will take care of the problem for you if you haven't already intervened. But keep in mind that what often happens is that a pest population will increase, and then it takes time for the predator population or parasitoid population to also increase. So there's frequently a little bit of lag time between when you first see the pest and when the predators can really start to handle them. Then if we still see a problem, maybe it's been a couple of weeks and the aphids are really eating our plants, we might move on to something like neem oil or insecticidal soap. And as a last resort, if we're still bothered by the aphids, we might move on to something like a synthetic pesticide. But remember that we're going to start at the bottom of our IPM pyramid with the least toxic, most benign methods, and then move up if we have to. We would want to keep records and really review whether our methods worked, Did we notice that there were some side effects that we didn't anticipate? And plan ahead so that we might be better prepared and step in and try to prevent the problem in the first place. So let me stop here. We have several resources that should be quite helpful to you, including our Harris County Master Gardener website. If you go to our website, you'll find all sorts of resources, including Ask a Master Gardener. You can click on that link and ask a question. And you can fill out a form with your question. You can send in photographs, and it will come to someone like me. We'll research your question and send back an answer. We just ask, especially for insects, that you take a really clear close-up photograph because that will help us in identifying. Texas AgriLife Extension, AE Horticulture, which includes Earthkind Landscaping, are also great resources. UC Davis IPM website is great. We also have the Texas IPM website. You can often search by type of plant. So if you notice that something's bugging your tomatoes, for example, you can see a long list of all of the different pests specifically for tomatoes. And that sort of helps to narrow your search. And then, of course, these websites also give you much more information about using IPM to control the pests. So do we have any other questions that I can answer?
Yeah, a couple of things came in. Really got so much great information. First off, I want to definitely vouch for the sending here. I'll put up there the Master Gardener sending in a question, because I did that and I got back a very detailed response and answer to my question. And I felt like I almost had wasted someone's time. The answer was so thorough. I was like, man, so I had like a good amount of, but it answered all my questions. So I definitely can attest to that. One thing you talked about, and I want to, is about essentially you're describing a farm journal as keeping, a record of, when you're using these insecticides, what's the, what are the results? And I wondered if you had any recommendations, like, is there a program for that, an app for that? Because I thought nowadays with your camera, you could be taking pictures and I hadn't really thought about keeping a diary of what I'm doing in my yard, but it's such a great idea.
Yes, they're all of the above, really. They have books if you prefer to write things out. Or these days I've gone to my computer because I don't want more paper. So I try to keep notes on my computer, digitize everything if I can. And that makes it very easy to include photographs or websites or other things that would be helpful. But the more you keep track of what's happening year to year, it not only will help you be a better gardener and take better care of your plants, but it also can help you prevent some of the pests from getting out of control quickly.
All right. Very good. Also, going back, Alicia had another question, was asking about, can I use BT in my yard for pests, but it won't affect my flower bed, butterfly, caterpillars? Does it stay where sprayed? Are you familiar with BT?
Yes, that's the Bacillus thuringiensis. That's the bacteria that they put in powdered form. As I mentioned, you can mix it with water and use it as a spray, and it will kill all caterpillars and larvae. Now, it's going to tend to be washed away by rain, so it's not going to persist for very long, but you would want to be very careful to protect your pollinators as much as possible if you're spraying it on some kind of larval pest.
Got it. Just want to remind everybody, I'm putting a post chat survey in the comments section right now. There's a link there. If you would please fill that out. Also, yes, here we go, a survey for all of our attendees. Let me just put those in the this section right now so I don't forget that. I want to make sure we got that. I had another question for you. This one is about, obviously you were talking about the spraying for mosquitoes. There's what we do, and then there's what everybody, what the county is doing right now. Or your neighborhood HOA, a lot of neighborhoods are doing it themselves. What are your thoughts on anything we can do do we need to watch out for that? Or is that something we can help? Or is that just kind of one of the natures of living in the suburbs in the city?
Yeah. Well, again, I think mosquitoes provide a really good example of the use of IPM because your first step is prevention. And we should all be out in our yards right now checking for any little containers of water. I did that yesterday and was really surprised to find things like plant saucers that had a little bit of water. And it's amazing how little water they actually need to be able to breed. So we need to empty all of those out. You can use larvicide products. They have little donuts that you can put in uh, ponds or other bodies of water. You can, they also chop up the donuts into granules that you could use in places like French drains or any other bit of water that might be in your yard. You can clean out bird baths pretty frequently. I usually clean mine out at least twice a week so that any larvae that might be in there are eliminated. And then, of course, most of us use various kinds of repellents, sprays, and foggers, and the little devices that have a battery and they heat up, create a vapor that repels, bug zappers.
Right.
And then what they're spraying generally in neighborhoods is called an adulticide. It's something that will kill the adult mosquitoes, and it is a pesticide. So I'm sure they try to use the most one that targets mosquitoes as much as possible, but it probably kills other insects as well.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned French drains there because that's something not a lot of people think about, but you definitely, that's one area where you just don't see it. It could look like it's dry all around it, but just about a few
Right.
inches, beneath your yard, you've got a whole pipe full of mosquitoes that could be breeding in there. So watch
Yeah,
out for
and
drains.
I found a huge number in the mulch in my yard. I have 3 enormous oak trees that drop leaves, and we like mulch. Mulch is good for our gardens, but not 8 inches. So I was out yesterday raking up oak leaves, trying to reduce the pile a little bit.
We just need to have you go out to everybody's yard, Deborah. That's what we need you to have it do some personal inspections and some yard work.
No, you're
That
on
is
your own
that is all the questions we have on our end. Did you have anything else you wanted to mention for? I've got the Master Gardener website up there. Anything else you
there.
would like
Okay.
to mention?
No, just the last chance. If anybody else has any questions, now's the time. We'll see if we
Absolutely.
can
And
answer them.
also to remind everybody, we have another show coming up next month, and you definitely want to come check out that as well. Let me see if I got for about seed saving and starting, because you're gonna now that you're gonna have no bugs, you're gonna have those seeds coming in. But other than that, Deborah, thank you so much for your time, and I really look forward to seeing you again in August for your next show. And tell everybody what that's going to be about again.
We'll be talking about growing bulbs in Texas.
Perfect. Now, that nothing more Texas than growing bulbs. So, Deborah, thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And thanks to my helpers and to everyone who had great questions.
Thanks so much. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.